All right, President Trump, North Korea, and a lot of geopolitical tensions surrounding the region is in the news recently. And I want to break down some of what's happening from an Anan and Q perspective, as well as addressing some of the interpretations around what is happening in this whole bigger deep state narrative battle perspective. So let's get right into it. All right, so this truth by President Trump says, based on my very good relationship with Kim Jong-un of North Korea, I'm not happy with the fact that the United States has long ago agreed to participate in joint military exercises with South Korea. These exercises are not only costly, with much of these costs paid for by the United States of America as usual, but send a signal that is totally inappropriate and hostile to a country that, as long as Donald J. Trump has been president, has been unthreatening and respectful. Therefore, and based on the fact that it is too late to cancel, I've instructed the Secretary of War, Pete Hegseth, to substantially reduce the joint military exercises. While somewhat unrelated, I recently asked the president of South Korea if they would like to join us in the denuclearization of the Islamic Republic of Iran, and they said no. Thanks. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, it is very routine on a yearly and biannual basis that South Korea, as well as other nations, especially led by the U.S. and South Korea, have military exercises in the Asia-Pacific region. And these drills are very, in some sense, provocative and from the world's perspective, have this sort of us versus you in terms of North Korea and its allies perspective. And so it's very, in some sense, hostile if you look at it that way. But right now, as the news is showing, the military exercises have actually been cut short. Now, his truth was a couple of days ago, but now this is from the last day or so. A lot of the military exercises apparently have been reduced. Now, listen to what President Trump said when a reporter asked him about why Kim Jong-un hasn't responded to you, and this is very telling.
Why hasn't Kim Jong-un responded to your request to have a conversation?
How do you know he hasn't responded?
Has he?
Yeah, he has.
Did you speak to him?
Where are you in conversation?
That's very positive. Well, just so you understand with South Korea, look, South Korea has been protected by us for many, many years. And during my first term, they agreed to pay close to $3 billion a year for protection because we don't, they essentially weren't paying. And I asked them to do that at my request. I said, no, they weren't happy about it, but they agreed. I asked for $10 billion. And they were very unhappy. But we agreed for a short term that it would be $3 billion, and next year it would go up, and the next year it would go up, so they start paying for their protection. When the election was rigged and I ended up watching for 4 years and then coming back, I watched Biden rescind that $3 billion a year for whatever reason. When I called recently the president of South Korea, who I think he's very nice actually, but I called him, I said, would you like to give us a little hand? We don't need help with Iran, but if you'd like, give us a hand with Iran. He said, no thanks. And I said, wait a minute, we have 39,000 soldiers over there guarding you from Kim Jong-un, your next door neighbor, and you're not going to help us on a very easy military operation in Iran? That's strange. No, we'd rather not get involved. I say, well, why are we involved in helping you? So, and I want to help them, but when you ask somebody, would you like to give us a hand, and they say no thanks, and then we're guarding them from a country and paying ourselves billions of dollars, it's costing us billions and billions of dollars to protect not only them, but other countries. Look at NATO. We spend hundreds of billions of dollars protecting Europe from Russia. Hundreds of billions, mostly from Russia, but from other things too. And then they say, well, they don't want to get involved with guarding the strait where they get most of their oil. They get 50% of their oil, and they don't want to get involved. Why are we doing it? So all I want is fairness. And South Korea, I get along with them very well, but they were paying $3 billion a year, and then they convinced Biden that I was probably a bad person and they shouldn't, and he immediately rescinded that order. So we were getting paid. We would have been getting paid a lot more, but we can't go around and protect all of these countries, especially when they're not there to help us.
Now, that is absolutely telling what he's doing. Now, I've been talking about how President Trump and the White Hats are trying to de-globalize the world and have people localized such that the U.S. and the White Hats and these guys don't have this military sort of power over certain regions of the world. And we've talked about how there's been infiltration from within. You have the swamp, you have the deep state. These guys are weaponizing the U.S. military, and President Trump and the White Hats, what they're doing is they're causing and creating attention, giving attention to this ridiculousness of how they are paying for or having all of this sort of military power all over the world. And especially with what's going on with Iran, the next area here is the Asia Pacific region, especially with North Korea and what the world is perceiving to be this duality, this us versus them. Now, one of the biggest things I talk about is this scale of awakening, your perception of reality and how it's being shaped by what you believe is your truth or your perception of truth, of reality. And so I've talked about how audience one is where a lot of people, especially if you're just dabbling in news or you think you know something about the world, you're looking at it from a linear surface narrative perspective. And especially with the North Korea situation, the world likes to look at it in a simplistic way. Us versus them, the U.S. versus North Korea, the U.S. and its allies versus North Korea and Russia and some other people or whatever it is, group the allies of North Korea there, and especially South Korea versus North Korea. But if you are in the awakened state, audience two, then you have a more deeper structural analysis. You go deeper. You have a sense of objective perspective in trying to understand what's happening. And here you might get deeper in saying that, okay, we look at competing interests. We look at negotiation. We look at North Korea as a strategic actor versus North Korea being the enemy. And here you can see this chart that I have divvied up here where a lot of people think, oh, Kim Jong-un is a dictator / a threat. But if you're in the awakened state, then you would know and you would understand objectively that Kim has incentives and constraints. So he's not sitting there trying to take over the world. He's not trying to sit there and think, you know what, I'm going to make enemies with everybody. He's sitting there. And yet I'm not saying that he's not a dictator. I'm not saying that he's not evil. I'm saying that if you have an objective understanding, especially in the audience awakened too, then you look at it from a more objective top-down perspective. Now, I'm going to get to audience three here in a second, but just rounding out audience one and audience two, some of the differences, if you look at it at face value, a lot of the statements, a lot of things, you look at the news and you think, oh, anything that is that's associated to Kim Jong-un and everybody else, okay, good versus evil, good guys versus bad guys. You look at events individually, you're accepting the prevailing narrative versus if you are in the awakened, you are separating rhetoric from strategy and you're following cause and effect. You're asking who benefits and you're questioning the prevailing narrative. And so you're looking at it more objectively, but also from the perspective of where you get news. You still have to operate within the realm or the sort of ecosystem, or in some sense, the echo chamber of the news that you are fed. You might spend more time, you might get deeper to be awakened, but you look at it, especially as a believer, as a Christian, more with love and with grace and mercy, and not with, oh, Kim and North Korea and all these guys are all this monolithic evil or whatever nation. So if you are in the enlightened, this is where I talk about with the Q stuff, the hidden system frameworks that, and many of us have said this before, and I've talked about the Q boards where we say that Kim Jong-un, and this is a big statement, is a deep state controlled, CIA controlled nation. So the deep state, they have a hand in trying to use Kim as a puppet for whatever purpose they have, a blackmailed asset. And so Kim operated against his own will from deep state pressure. So I'm not saying that Kim is all good and all that stuff, but he might be in collusion with them. But more often than not, as many of us have been saying, he has been freed since Trump came in, ever since his first term, from the grip and the tyranny of the deep state. So we talked about Obama, and shortly here we'll talk about Pelosi and many others that have visited and gone into North Korea and that have made Kim do certain things. It's not all that you believe, where it's a closed off society, you can't get there and all that stuff. But really, there's other things happening that are hidden and from public limelight. So you have to connect some of these dots, and we'll, in a short second here, examine some of the Q posts, but you're questioning the prevailing narrative as being part of a bigger operation. Now, I want to read some commentary from Joe Lange, who does an excellent job at breaking down some of these things, but also go to the Q board and talk about this. So we'd read the post from President Donald Trump, but here his commentary says joint military operations have always been narrative control to paint some countries as our allies and others as our enemies. These days, or those days, are coming to an end. North Korea has never been our true enemy. They were always controlled by the CIA. The real enemy wasn't North Korea and Kim Jong-un. He was just a controlled puppet who has been finally set free. The CIA/shadow government are real enemies within and always have been. Now, Q Post 430 says this: what clowns do with the access codes and tech? Who controls North Korea? Who really controls North Korea? What families are protected using leverage? Bank/financial leverage, nuke strike package leverage-wise Iran, protected-wise Iran funded by the U.S. What news about Iran broke? Drugs? What about weapons of mass destruction? Why did Brennan/others provide false intel? North Korea capability and Iran tech/nuke dev. Playful, have faith. And continuing on with this commentary, when Trump won the election in 2016, the Obama administration provided false information to the Trump administration on both North Korea and Iran's nuclear weapons capabilities. The Obama administration had already provided weapons-grade uranium to both North Korea and Iran through the Uranium One deal. They were purposely arming our supposed enemies with nuclear weapons, uranium, and technology. America for sale. They had been providing these materials to our enemy puppets long before Trump ever became president. Did you know that Nancy Pelosi accidentally admitted in an interview that she traveled to North Korea and met Kim Jong-un? Now, this is part of Q-Drop 1185, where it says, big error. Pelosi admits travel to North Korea. Past. Archive immediately. They tried to cover this. Why is this relevant? And then here is the video. These people will lose everything. Now, when you click the link here, it goes to a C-SPAN archive video from April 19, 2018. Now, this is interesting because this video, as it shows, goes into what she admits at minute 13.
Well, let me just say that as one of the few members of Congress who has been to Pyongyang, I did a number of years ago as a member of the Intelligence Committee. It's a frightening place. It's a place that is, when I've seen poverty throughout throughout the world, as an appropriator and visited the world to see our initiatives and how helpful they might be in the alleviation of poverty, the eradication of disease. When I went to North Korea, I saw a poverty of spirit that just was mind-boggling in many respects, and it's a difficult place. Our purpose then was to say, we want to talk about MIAs and POWs. We want you to stop proliferating, selling your missile technology, issues like that, checking in on the hunger situation because their people were starving, even though their motto was self-reliance, they couldn't feed their own people. And so what they told us then, and so what's relevant to now, is they said, hey, we just sell these this technology for money. You want to buy them? We'll sell them to you. And so what my guidance from there to the current situation is the capability of the North Koreans to create either the technology for a weapon, the miniaturization of it, the capacity to launch it, and the intention to do so is something that we need to know as much about as possible. But in addition to that, they're proliferators. And this is what I keep saying to the administration.
Now listen to what she says there. She says that she's one of the only few members that have actually gone to Pyongyang. And what's interesting is that if you research this all over, and this is specifically with AI here, which amalgamates all of the news sources, has Nancy Pelosi been to North Korea? It says no, she has never been inside North Korea. However, she did visit the JSA in South Korea, DMZ, back in August 2022. And even before that, asking about this clip. Yes, AI admits it, but saying that something about 1997. And again, this, as she was saying, was only a few years ago. So it's very recent. But again, this is being scrubbed or it's being accidentally leaked. And I was also able to see an archive version, I think a clipping of somebody, a user that took it, and there was a notation here, which is almost verbatim to that Q drop. Big error. Pelosi admits travel to North Korea passed. Archive immediately. They have tried to cover this. The words used, re-intel and buying, selling, will bury her. So again, I think this is a user-generated thing, or it could be something that prior to that post, somebody was trying to give notations to hide this. And just going along with the commentary, did you know that Obama desperately tried to call Kim Jong-un when he found out that he was negotiating a peace deal with Trump? Panic in D.C. Now, this equates here to post 1465. Would you believe Hussein tried to call Kim prior to the summit? He did not have his updated phone number. North Korea generals released closed the pathway for bad actors. Now, I've talked about this before, but Obama also had visited North Korea and Kim Jong-un, and this is on a previous post here, but listen to what this other commentary is saying from Joling. Kim Jong-un's strings had already been cut through secret negotiations with Pompeo. Kim Jong-un had agreed to blow up their nuclear weapons underground mountain facility. Did you know that Obama wasn't the first president helping North Korea develop nuclear weapons? The Clintons were helping the CIA do it long before Obama. Anybody remember Bill Richardson, the past governor of New Mexico and close associate of the Clintons, Obama, and Epstein? Did you know that Richardson traveled with Google head Eric Schmidt to North Korea? Why? Do you hide the sale of nuclear weapons material from the public and congressional scrutiny? Panic in D.C. caught arming our supposed enemies. Now, this is a picture from Q Drop 444, which basically just shows this picture. And that post 39, which said, would it blow your mind if I told you BO, which is Barack Obama, has been to North Korea and perhaps there now? Why did his administration do little to slow their nuclear and missile capabilities? Who feeds North Korea with strategic intel? Iran? What deal was done with Iran under Barack Obama? Why was a deal sealed under a top secret classification? Why wasn't Congress notified? Why, after Barack Obama left office, all of a sudden North Korea has nukes and the tech to miniaturize for payload delivery within the U.S.? What about NSA, CIA, DI, etc., all confirming tech won't be in place for 5+ years, statements which were made in 2016. Why is all of this relevant, and what does it tell you? Big picture is rare. Now remember, as I've talked about before, the strings were already cut in Trump's first term, meaning that Kim Jong-un and North Korea have been freed from the deep state stronghold. So look at post 1451. Does Kim look nervous prior to the big meeting with POTUS? Did they already meet long ago? Is he preparing at his hotel with his advisors ahead of time? Or is he out enjoying the freedom he never had in the past? Deal done, safe, on guard. POTUS moves up departure. Why? The world is safer. Iran developments. Q. Now, there's a very interesting post here, 1450, which show Kim Jong-un visiting Singapore. And there's a bunch of pictures here, and this was back in 2018. But what's interesting is at the end of this, it's Q says, Gardens by the Bay, see previous pic, timestamp, coincidence. Everything shown has meaning. You're watching a scripted movie. So again, President Trump, as well as what's happening all around this Asia theater, a lot of what's happening next is going to involve first bringing attention to this area such that people will research and give more news coverage to it, and then other things will drop. So right now what we're seeing is a de-globalization, a removal of the possible militarization, the possible weaponization of the U.S., the military, the CIA, the deep state, every control that they have. And again, President Trump has already been dismantling some of this, but we're seeing this play out in this region. So more to come, guys, but I want to give you guys this quick update. Love you guys. Talk to you guys very soon.